I've been working on CrossFit athletes for over 8 years. I've been embedded in the CrossFit community here at CrossFit Roots for that long, and I've run my practice out of the gym for almost 4 years now. And one of the things I treat the most in this community, in these athletes, is shoulders. It's the body part that needs the most work from a preventive standpoint to allow these athletes to do the amazing things that they do. So I'm really eager to share what I know about shoulders, shoulder health, anatomy, biomechanics, prevention, and how we can continue to do overhead movement and strong, powerful CrossFit movement without injury. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for tuning back into Stability WOD. Hey you guys, welcome back to Stability WOD. Today I want to take some time to move from one super complex area, the lumbar spine, to a whole new super complex area, the shoulder and the shoulder blade and the rotator cuff. Most of us assume when we have a shoulder problem, there must be something wrong with our rotator cuff. And while the rotator cuff can be implicated in lots of things, from impingement to shoulder rotator cuff tears, to labral problems, to instability, hypermobility, the rotator cuff is not usually where a lot of the problems are. And that's because the shoulder is a very unique joint. It's a joint where the shoulder proper, the ball and socket joint, has to be able to move, but what's also moving at the same time is the shoulder blade, which sits on our ribs, on our back. And while the arm is moving, the shoulder blade is also moving so that it can reorient itself to keep up with a moving ball. If these two things don't sync up and happen at the right time, in the right order, things go wrong. And so many people I see with rotator cuff problems are maybe dealing with the rotator cuff part of the problem, but they're neglecting the scapula and they're neglecting the shoulder blade and all the dysfunction that's present there. And I can tell you from experience that a lot of shoulder problems clear up once we figure out how to get control over the scapula. So let's take a look at the anatomy. The anatomy of the shoulder is really quite incredible when you consider that really the only bony connection that the shoulder and the shoulder blade has to the body is through the collarbone. This tiny little bone that comes over and attaches onto the sternum. I talked about form and force closure the other day, and you realize that the shoulder and the shoulder blade is really very dependent on force closure. That is the ability of the muscles to hold the shoulder stable, to hold everything together in the face of high speed, high load, and high forces. So it's just a remarkable body part anatomically. The shoulder blade is this triangular flat bone that really sits on your rib cage. So this is with the ribs removed. They'd be kind of wrapping around if you were looking from the front to the sternum, and you wouldn't see the shoulder blade unless you were looking at the back. This is what the front of the shoulder blade looks like, the side that faces the ribs. And then you have your humerus, your arm bone, which has this great big ball. And you've probably heard that the shoulder is a ball and socket joint, and it is, but I describe it more like a golf ball on a golf tee, because it's this great big ball and this tiny little socket, which is actually part of the shoulder blade. It's important to know that the other side of the articulation of the socket is actually attached to the shoulder blade. And you can see on these other pictures here all the muscular attachments. And we're not going to get too much of that today, because mostly what I'm wanting to share with you is a couple things. The anatomy of the shoulder blade is such that it has these little prominences that attach, that sort of come off of the shoulder blade. This one's called the acromion. It comes off and loops up and forms a roof over top of the ball. And as a result, it's in the way when we go to take our arm, our humerus, and bring it overhead. It's threatening to sort of smash into that roof, and that happens in some people where they get a little bit of rotator cuff impingement or even tear because of that bony roof. Because of the roof that sits over the ball, the shoulder blade actually has to move with the arm. So as the arm's going overhead and it hits about 60 degrees out to the side, the shoulder blade has to start moving in this direction, has to start rotating upward. As the arm continues to move to 90 degrees, suddenly the roof has to start moving significantly out of the way. So the shoulder blade continues to move upward in this direction until it's almost 90 degrees from where it started. When you get fully overhead and this arm articulates fully overhead to receive weight or to do a handstand or to rock climb, the shoulder blade has completely moved and reoriented itself so that now the socket this tiny little socket, which is the golf tee, instead of facing outward, now all of a sudden it faces upward. And it literally looks like a golf tee stuck in the ground with the ball coming down into the golf tee. So here's the reorientation. It starts here, the socket, and then it rotates up, and suddenly the ball can come down and orient into the socket, loaded like that. Now, so before I start moving my arms here, you're going to see that my shoulder blades sit at about this angle at rest, and my sockets have this orientation at rest, with the ball and my arm sitting kind of like that. As I start to move my arms to 60 degrees, you're going to see that they start to elevate. I get to about here, and my shoulder blade has already changed angle, facing like that, which means the socket is already starting to face up a little bit to accommodate the movement of the ball, which is now sort of following it as my arms move up. As I continue to go overhead, you're going to see that now my shoulder blades have rotated almost 90 degrees. Now they're oriented this way, and the socket has reoriented to this vertical orientation to be able to accept the ball, so that now my arm bones are loaded down into my shoulder blade bones, which is all supported by my muscles, which you'll see going forward. You're going to see, when you do this again, I won't mark it up this time, you can see my shoulder blades really move upward and reorient. And then I'll mark it up again and I start to go out into abduction. You can see here at 90 degrees, my shoulder blades have already oriented this way. My sockets have changed their angle to start to follow the ball up into space. And as I go overhead, again, my shoulder blades are now oriented this way. Again, my sockets are facing here so that they can accept the ball in a healthy position. And I can hold a whole lot of weight, including my whole body weight, in that position. I'll show one more time. Slow-mo. Shoulder blades start to rotate about there, and they continue to rotate. The ball follows my arm bones to clear that acromion. It moves up out of the way so that I can be overhead without impinging in a healthy position. So I hope you're still with me, and at this point, I hope that you're wondering, what the heck is the rotator cuff's role in coordinating this dynamic movement? The rotator cuff is a series of 4 muscles that come off of the shoulder blade. This is the back of the shoulder blade now. The infraspinatus muscle comes out of this little space here. Teres minor, which comes off of this sort of outer edge of the shoulder blade up to the back of the shoulder. The supraspinatus muscle comes off the top of the shoulder blade. And then you have the subscapularis muscle, which comes from the front of the shoulder blade and attaches over onto the front of the ball. So we have 2 rotator cuff muscles on the back that attach into the back. We have 1 rotator cuff muscle, supraspinatus, which comes underneath this bony roof acromion, where it's in line to get pinched or torn or compressed or impinged. It attaches onto the lateral side, the outer side of the humerus. And then we have the subscapularis, which attaches onto the front of the humeral head, the front of the ball. And as a result, these muscles form a cuff. They form a cuff around the ball that surrounds it on all sides. And their only job, is to keep the ball centered in the socket, to keep the ball from falling out of the golf tee, no matter where your arm is in space. It keeps it centered so that the ball can spin and stay centered rather than rolling out in one direction or another, where it's going to bump against the bone, it's going to bump against the labrum, which is the sort of cartilage ring that surrounds the socket. So the rotator cuff has this very dynamic job, like puppet strings, of keeping the golf ball on top of the golf tee. So while the rotator cuff has an extremely dynamic and important job, it's not what actually guides the movement of our shoulder as we're moving overhead. The rotator cuff just helps the ball follow the socket. What we're going to dig into tomorrow is what muscles are actually moving the socket. What muscles are actually moving the shoulder blade? Because the shoulder blade is what's in charge, ultimately, of you getting into the right position overhead. And this is where so many things go wrong in overhead athletes. Keep following along with this anatomy lesson. I realize it's involved. I realize it's a complex joint, but this is going to completely change your perspective on your shoulders, on your mobility work, on your ability to function in overhead positions in a strong and healthy way. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Please take a second to subscribe, and thanks for tuning in to Stability WOD.